Hello everyone, thank you for joining our digital event today. Our event is titled Richmond's Gold Comes to Florida, featuring special guest Dr. Erwin Wunderlich. My name is Rachel DeRosier and I am the Event and Marketing Coordinator for Manatee Village Historical Park. You can comment at any time. We will be monitoring the comment section and we will answer them as we can. We probably will not answer them right away. We'll get back to you within the next few days. Please stand by as we get ready. Hello everybody, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our presenter today. Dr. Erwin Wunderlich is an award-winning Florida historical fiction novelist, a children's book author and illustrator, and a retired naval officer. His newest novel, Drummer Boy on the Run, a Civil War treasure novel, is a fictional account of how Richmond's treasure made it to Florida in 1865. For the last several years, Erwin's love for history and illustration has extended to his creating and collecting scrimshaw items, for which he is a recipient of multiple art awards. Erwin grew up in Bradenton. We'll be beginning shortly.
Welcome, good afternoon. Thank you to Ms. DeRosier and the village for having me. My name is Erwin Wunderlich. I grew up in Bradenton, went to all my early schooling here, and enjoy the historical emphasis that the village provides, which is very similar to when I write my books about Florida. The same type of historical emphasis is in the books. So my father was a podiatrist here in Manatee County. He was the only podiatrist. When I grew up, probably today there's 50 podiatrists in Manatee County. My dad instilled in me the love of the outdoors, both on the water as well as in the woods. And my mother, she kind of instilled in me an appreciation for the arts. She would take me down on Saturday mornings to the pier here in Bradenton, and I would get my art lessons in how to draw and paint, sculpture, different art forms. So those influences were extremely important to me later in life. When I graduated from Manatee High School, I went to the Naval Academy, then graduated and would be on submarines. So later I would leave the Navy, and presently I do small farming plus beekeeping. Let me advance the slide. And I also have continued my illustration skills to include scrimshaw. This slide gives you a little bit more about me. My latest Florida novel is Drummer Boy on the Run. And as the title of this talk goes, it pertains to how Richmond's gold came to Florida at the close of the Civil War, which is a true story in and of itself, but I fictionalized that story and added drummers to the story. So I'll explain why I added drummers later in the talk. But it is a true story that Richmond's gold came to Florida. It's very well documented in the federal records from 1865. So we'll talk about how the gold got to Florida at the close of the Civil War. Dr. A.J. Hanna, what role did he play in this gold story, and well, what happened to the gold? So you can ask questions as you can on the internet. Sometimes on the internet, when I'm listening to a meeting, I'll open a blank PowerPoint and I'll copy paste the slides into the PowerPoint so I can refer to them later, even though I'm a listener. But anyways, and if you have questions, please let me know. So those are I do beekeeping and small farming, and the picture on the lower left is of a scrimshaw that I produced recently. I'll be talking on the topic of scrimshaw next month here at Cortez at the Maritime Museum. So I'll be out there talking about that scrimshaw, and in the month after that I have some talks at the Florida Writers Conference. One of those talks will be on historical writing, so you listeners with your history interests may be interested in that as well. The Florida Writers Conference in Altamont. Again, we're talking about 1865, how Richmond's gold was moved to Florida. I write various Florida-themed books. They're all on Amazon. I illustrate the books as well, so the children's stories I've written about Florida are there. And in the lower part of the screen, the two Florida Civil War novels are shown, the latest being the Drummer Boy novel. All of these are on Amazon. All have received various kinds of awards. Okay, so I have three people that I wanted to introduce to you, the listeners, that pertain to the gold coming to Florida. The first principal person in this gold story is A.J. Hanna, Dr. Hanna. Dr. Hanna in the 1930s is a history professor at Rollins College in Central Florida. As a history professor, like so many history professors, they're always researching things and trying to get published. And well, Dr. Hanna in 1938 has his book published as shown on the right side here. The book is called Flight into Oblivion. And Dr. Hanna is shown on the left side in a photograph where he's signing one of these books. I do have a signed copy of his first book here. In any event, Dr. Hanna was in Central Florida and did the research and did the interviews that he could, and researched all the records and all the interviews that had been done at the end of the Civil War to put together his book about the collapse of the Confederacy. So it's you can go to one place and read the whole story. You don't have to go to hundreds of different records about U.S. Army, the collapse of the Confederacy, or Jefferson Davis Library, or any of all these sources of information about the collapse of the Confederacy. You can just go to Hanna's book. So Hanna's book starts in April of 1865. And my book also starts in April of 1865 with the gold part of it. And my book finishes in May of 1865 when the gold is delivered to Archer, Florida. And on the cover here of Dr. Hanna's book is how the gold rolled into Florida. You can see a picture of a wagon, and the wagons there were several wagons that brought the gold into Florida from Richmond, Virginia. So the story goes that Ulysses S. Grant was about to take Richmond, and Richmond was falling as the capital of the Confederacy. in early 1865. So Jefferson Davis tells his Secretary of the Treasury, who is Makaja Clerk, we'll talk about him in a minute, to unload the gold and silver and jewelry and precious things from Richmond's banks and move those precious items further south because Richmond is about to fall. We do not want our resources to fall in the hands of the federal army, so move all the gold and silver out of the banks south. And so that's pretty much one of the stories that Hannah talks about in this book. So another story that pertains to Manatee County that's in this book is how Judah Benjamin, at the time, he is the Secretary of State in Richmond, and he is a very wanted man because President Lincoln has been assassinated, and all the newspapers, the northern newspapers, are blaming Judah Benjamin because secretaries of state throughout the centuries are always doing nefarious things. So they want Judah Benjamin big time as the war is over. So Judah Benjamin in the book is fleeing Richmond. He will end up for a good period of time out at the Gamble Mansion, which is close to Bradenton, the Gamble Mansion, and hide out there. And the book further goes into that Judah Benjamin evacuated the Gamble Mansion using an overland method to get to Sarasota, whereupon he took a small boat to Cuba. So again, Hannah's book about the collapse of the Confederacy starts in early 1865, ends in 1889 when Jefferson Davis dies. So that's Hannah's book. Highly recommend it to any of the Florida history buffs that are listening. Okay, the second character that's a principal in the gold story is a gentleman by the name of Captain Makaja Clerk. You know, if you have Jefferson Davis telling your Secretary of the Treasury, Clark, get the gold out of Richmond, you got to have basically somebody that'll actually do it and devise the methods to get the gold further south, away from the federal army. So in the course of writing my version of the gold story, I have the surrender happening up at the top of the map at Appomattox. The 2nd Florida is surrendering, and Richmond, just north of Appomattox, is falling. So the Confederacy is collapsing. And if you see the dotted line on the map from Appomattox and further south, you will see the path that the surrendering soldiers returning to Florida on foot, defeated, will have to travel. And in their travels, they're going to inadvertently cross paths with the gold wagons. So in my book, I have the drummers from the 2nd Florida, which has surrendered and is walking home, being recruited as wagon drivers for the gold wagons. But in any event, the war has been devastating upon Florida males. Those males have if we're talking roughly 15,000 Confederate soldiers from Florida, they've been used under Robert E. Lee's guidance in Virginia in the horrific battles that Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia had to take on, including Gettysburg. So the second Florida has participated in that. Other Florida units have been in the Western Theater of the Civil War, which also has had difficult times, to say the least. And lastly, the third prong of Florida Confederate soldiers has been the Home Guard, or the older men perhaps, or the key industry folks, which the only industry we had in Florida at the time was cattle. Very little other industries were happening, but the key Floridians in the minimal industries and the older Floridians would not go to the battlefronts and would be part of the Home Guard and remain in Florida like a militia or on-the-call group of soldiers to protect Florida against the raids that would come in from the salt waters around Florida. So we had the Home Guard, the Western Theater Floridians that would be fighting against Sherman's advances and so forth, and then the Virginia Floridians who'd be surrendering up at Appomattox. All told, I don't know if I mentioned, about 1/3 of those 15,000 Floridian soldiers died. And many more were severely wounded of those numbers. And they would be returning to Florida barefoot and injured and so forth. But the gold is also moving south. So this is the principal character number 2, Makaja Clerk, the leader, Secretary of the Treasury. Get the gold out of Richmond. Do whatever it takes. If you can imagine the environment that's happening in 1865, there's chaos happening. There's collapse of law and order. Bandits everywhere. Everybody, it's fend for yourself. There's no food. Everybody's wounded. There's no males in the houses. The males are all marching back from surrendering. And the law and order that was present during the Confederacy has collapsed itself. So now also the northern newspapers are out for vengeance, and the Congress of the United States is out for vengeance. And we've had all these fatalities of Pennsylvania and New York's soldiers, and we want accountability. We want that gold. And we want the U.S. Army to chase down the gold. We know the gold has left Richmond. The federal army needs to go find it and get it back to the Treasury in Washington. On the other hand, the Southerners believe, well, this gold is ours. It came out of North Georgia, out of Dahloneg's gold mines, and as Georgia went to war with the United States, like the rest of the Confederacy, they took over the United States Mint in North Georgia and got the gold coins that were being produced and moved the gold coins to Richmond. Okay, now 4 years later, the Confederacy is collapsing. We have to empty the banks of these gold coins, and we're going to keep these gold coins in the South. They don't belong in any way to the North. So there's a lot of chaos going on, the lack of law and order, bandits and soldiers trying to find the gold happening. Now, as for me, I had to retrace this path using Hannah's book, and actually drive the path and stop at the museums and stop at the libraries, talk to the people in both of those along the path, and see what stories they might have had, see what the terrain looked like that the wagons would have to roll through, account for the damage done to the bridges and things as part of Sherman's march through Georgia, and see how the gold would eventually arrive on May 22nd, 1865 in Archer, Florida. And that is a true story. The gold would make it down to Archer using wagons. Shown on Hannah's book cover on May 22nd, 1865. Now, if you look at the map, Archer, Florida is there, and the empty wagons would then move further to Jacksonville, at which point the conspirators, if you will, Makaja, Clerk, and others would board ships in Jacksonville and sail to Norfolk back toward their homes. So anyways, that's the map as to how Richmond's gold was moved a tiny bit east of Atlanta down to Archer, Florida, unloaded, and the empty wagons would go to Jacksonville, and ships were caught to return the Clark and his comrades to Virginia. Okay, that's the first two principal characters, and finally we have the other principal character here. It's David Yulee. David Yulee's plantation in Archer, Florida would be the recipient of the gold coming from Richmond. On May 22nd, 1865, under cover of night, the wagons would roll into Archer, Florida with the gold. And a little bit about David Yulee, if you may be a little more familiar with David Yulee, a brilliant, prominent Floridian in the early 1800s. Now, to give him full credit wouldn't be correct, because his father was quite a Floridian also. His father was Moses Levy, and the King of Spain had granted Moses large amounts of land in Florida, well before the United States had control of Florida. So, for example, the King of Spain gave Yulee's father all of Seminole County, that's where I live. He owns the whole county. This is Yulee's dad, and other large tracts of land. And then the United States would have control of Florida, and the Spanish would leave, and along comes Moses' son, David Yulee, who, in contrast to his dad, is an outgoing entrepreneur. And Yulee would become the first United States Senator in Washington for the territory of Florida. Yulee, as a man, knew Florida backwards and forwards because his dad was a huge landowner. He had grown up seeing how his dad had managed the lands in Florida. But Yulee was more of an outgoing individual, again, a brilliant man. And Yulee originated this idea that why don't we build a railroad from our major seaports so that we could connect our seaports. Our major seaports are in Fernandina, up in northeast Florida, and the other major seaports in Cedar Key, Florida, on the Gulf. If we build a railroad, we can have the ships unload their cargo at Fernandina. The railroad will move the cargo over to Cedar Key, and other ships will be able to reload the cargo onto the ships and they can be moved into Texas and other places. So this is Yuli's brilliant idea, and that would thereby save ships sailing around Key West, which is pretty torturous, especially in the summer. So this is what Yuli's idea was, and Yuli is up in Washington, and he's a senator, so he's able to have access to northern financiers to bring money to Florida. So he pulls it off. He gets the money. He builds this cross-Florida railroad. At the outbreak of the Civil War, the railroad is running. But unfortunately, the Confederacy needs the rails of the railroad for naval use. Ironclads have to be built of iron, and that's what the railroad tracks are built of, iron. So we're going to take your railroad iron and use it for other purposes, but the railroads aren't running anyways because warships are all around Fernandina and Cedar Key to begin with. So there's really no use of the railroad during the Civil War. So Yuli's railroad turns out to be a bust because of the war. Not that it's not a good idea, or it was not a good idea at the time, but during a war, it's not a good idea. So Yuli is up to his ears and alligators in debt because he has no revenue and he has all this debt to build this railroad from the northern financiers. But Yuli's brilliant. He figures his way out of it. I don't want to talk too much about how Yuli gets himself out of that trap. But Yuli is a key player because in this story, the gold arrives at Yuli's plantation in Archer, Florida. And in fact, on May 22nd, this gold is buried in Yuli's barn. And why do we know that this actually happened? Well, we know because the Federal Army, several days later, due to informants, would go into the barn and dig up the gold and document it. The Army's really good at documenting what they do. So it was well documented that Yuli had gold in his barn. So that's where Yuli plays into this story. I went ahead and put Yuli into the book and tried to capture his personality and so forth as the gold arrives. David Yuli, he's the last principal character. So we have, in review, Dr. Hannah, who does the research of what happened during the collapse of the Confederacy. Where did the people go? Where did the gold go? Then we have Captain Makaja Clerk, the Secretary of Treasury, who pulls off perhaps the greatest wagon train adventure in history to move the gold into Florida safely. Mission accomplished. And then we had the last principal here, David Yuli, where the gold ends up. So these are all true characters, true stories. So you then may say, well, what's this about drummers? Why? I have, as a writer, I have the creative license in a historical fiction novel to change events in a small way, maybe, as I desire. So down in Sarasota, a Civil War relic shows up while I'm doing my research and writing the early parts of this drummer book. This is a $5 thrift store item, and lo and behold, it's a Civil War insignia. It's about 2 inches by 2 inches, and it's brass. So I said, voila. In keeping with Captain Clark's secret movement of this gold, I'll put drummers in the story. And in fact, as the lower graphic shows, I'm going to have these drummers driving these gold wagons. So I bring in the 2nd Florida drummers. They've surrendered. They need a ride. back to Florida. And conveniently, the gold is also going to end up in Florida as well. So the way Captain Clark actually pulls off the trickery to move the gold to Florida is he hides the gold under the floorboards of ambulance wagons, such as I've drawn here. So if you can imagine, there's floorboards. These ambulance wagons are to transport injured soldiers during the battles, but we're going to move some injured soldiers back to Florida. And by the way, there's gold hidden under the floorboards. So there's false floorboards and gold in the back of these ambulance wagons. And since it's kind of trickery that they're ambulance, there's not really anybody injured. And we have innocent-looking drummer boys driving these ambulance wagons. And I think I'll just add nurses to the ambulance wagons, since they're called the ambulance wagons, should have nurses. That these wagons will be allowed full access to all the roads at the end of the Civil War without undue harassment of soldiers or bandits and so forth. There's a little sympathy. So the story goes, I've added drummers, I've added nurses, because I come across this brass insignia, which kind of gives me an idea. And we're going to have nurses, some female nurses that are in the ambulance wagons, tending to the injured, so-called injured Confederates. So basically, as the last sentence there says, why not expand the trickery of Captain Clark's by myself adding nurses and drummers as wagon drivers down to Archer, Florida. And so that's one of the questions that people may have in the back of their heads. I should also mention that besides the gold being hidden in the false floorboards, there are false water barrels as well. So the water barrel might be half water and the other half gold. So there's false bottoms in the water barrels also, as part of Captain Clark's trickery in the actual event. So people might also ask, well, since you're the author of the drummer book, and you went to all these places and you talked to all these people, did you learn anything further about the gold? In my book, I just went ahead and had the gold buried in Yulee's barn, which was the real story, on May 22nd of 1865. But there's all these other rumors that pertain to, well, the gold was also in other places. So I went ahead, using my best guess as to what I thought was realistic, and if we were going to hide gold elsewhere in Florida, how would we do it? And I just mentioned my dad and his dad were old-time Floridian outdoors people, and fishing out in the woods, and they always had a liking to, if there was no fish out there or there was nothing happening, well, let's go treasure hunting, because there's all kinds of pirate treasure and whatnot buried around Florida. So Floridians, when I grew up in the 50s, were very much a bunch of treasure hunters and outdoors people. So I used my background as to treasure hunting in Florida to, given all the treasure that's been dug up and so forth, and what my friends and relatives used to do, where would you hide gold if it was up to me? So I added a piece in there that not only is the gold buried in Yuli's barn, but we also have another burial in Florida. So, but if you look at this big question, is all the gold been accounted for? You kind of probably have to look at two different aspects. The credibility on the left is the credibility of the official records, which I've reviewed, and the credibility of unofficial rumors, which I've also come across many of those. And with the smattering of these coins out of Georgia in the lower right-hand side have become so rare, and the gold coins are so valuable that again they would rival Mel Fisher's finds if you were to find other Confederate gold in Florida. So looking at this, as mentioned, it was documented that the Federal Army recovered gold out of Yuli's barn. Now, Yuli's barn and plantation was caught fire and burned down about 100 years ago, so they're no longer out there. Now, you look at the official records. The Army is, again mentioned, excellent at writing, documenting what they do. So the Army's records of the chase after the gold and after-action reports are done well, except there's maybe some bullet holes in some of those reports, so to speak. The U.S. Army, also the Federal Army, interviewed Confederate officers after 1865 as well to try to make sure they recovered all the gold. But as I look at the reports, the Army reports, I don't feel that they faced adequate scrutiny. And I also think that Hanna, back in 1938, as he puts his Sentinel book together, he also was surprised by what he had found out and documented in the book, and that he was just out of patience and out of time, and he didn't want to go further into researching rumors that were out there about the gold being elsewhere besides Yuli's barn. And you even see evidence of rumors today, if you watch the History Channel, Confederate gold stories that move the gold north and so forth. But anyways, we do have the official account, and the gold did make it to Yuli's barn. So we have a credibility exam there. Now I have rumors. As I've traveled the places here for this book, I find that many Floridians are certain, there's not a doubt in their mind that Confederate gold was hidden elsewhere than Yuli's barn. Okay, do I assign a good credibility? Maybe. Then there's also, since I've done this research, I've also tried to read extensively about Yuli and his personality. There's a book out of Fernandina about Yuli's life, and you come to the conclusion, it's a good book. Let me mention the author, Celeste Kavanaugh. It starts with a K, Kavanaugh. Celeste has written a really nice little booklet about Yulee because their museum up in Fernandina kind of honors Yulee because of the Cross Florida Railroad from Fernandina. But anyways, Yulee is basically, he knows everything that's going on in Florida in the 1860s, the 1850s. It's interesting that Yulee kind of divorces himself from the gold being in his barn. So he's, for instance, the night of May 22nd, he's not home, but the gold is put in his barn. Yulee is the master wheeler dealer throughout the Civil War, before the Civil War, and so forth. I believe that Yulee's network in wartime Florida, as well as pre-wartime Florida, was unparalleled. I have a lot of doubt that Yulee didn't know that that gold was coming into his plantation that night. He had been a senator alongside Senator Jefferson Davis, and obviously Jefferson Davis had targeted Yulee's plantation to receive the gold, yet Yulee's absent and doesn't seem to know anything about it. It seems mysterious to me in all the records. And lastly, I listen to old-timer stories. They have this story and that story, and these are people in their 70s and maybe 80s. And they tell me stories like, well, my grandmother told me, or my great-grandmother told me there's gold buried in XXX, or my grandmother told me that there's gold buried in YYY. And I step back and I think there's no reason for their grandmothers to lie to their grandchild in such a manner that Confederate gold was buried somewhere in North Florida. So I have that weighs on me. And I think, again, Hannah saw the same thing. There's no reason for grandmothers to lie and tell you about gold at the end of the Civil War. Now, further, if you were trying to keep Confederate gold being hidden somewhere a secret, my belief is that this is the kind of secret that could stay a secret. Usually, I don't know what the percentage might be, 90% of the secrets don't last very long. There's informants and so forth that snitch on gold or whatever. And at the time, if somebody suddenly became rich in 1866, say, that they found pirate gold, just like my father and his father and all the friends that we knew, they were always out treasure hunting anyways. So there could be massive gold caches that haven't been discovered or have been uncovered and cashed in, so to speak, very covertly. So that's a question at the top of this slide. Did I learn anything new? I think I did. I enjoyed talking to people along the way, the librarians, the museum people, the mayor, or whoever I spoke to. What did they know about Confederate gold coming through their town? And I do believe overall that the official records of it coming to Archer, Florida are incomplete. So that's it. You had the three principal characters. It started with A.J. Hanna doing the research in the 1930s, and Captain Makaja Clerk as getting the gold to Florida. and then David Yulee, his barn being the recipient of the gold. And then I added in drummers and nurses that weren't actually part of the ambulance story. But, and a little bit of conjecture as to what happened to all the gold. At the time, I think I mentioned, but if I didn't, it was about $200,000 in gold that had been mined in North Georgia. So, but it's quite valuable in modern value. And the references, I have the Flight into Oblivion book, definitely recommend for Florida history buffs, so that it'd be on your shelf. And the second one there is Celeste Kavanaugh's Story of David Yulee. There's a good book that I read over Christmas and got a copy of. It's called Moses Levy, who is David Yulee's dad. And Moses Levy's book is written by Chris Monaco, who is currently affiliated with the University of Florida. Just a wonderful book about David Yulee's dad. And David Yulee himself, the book there by Celeste. So some references there. I have my books. There's me and Abe. Abe and I out at Lake City at the illustrious reenactment. But so I'll leave it to Rachel here. Thank you all for listening, and we hope to see you soon in good health. Thank you.
That was really good.
Thanks.
All right, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments section and we'll get back to you. Thank you so much.